I want to share with you. I love history, history of the world, American history, and I love studying it because it's interesting. You can take the highlights of any time, and it seems really good. In my lifetime, there may be one or two highlights like that. But there's a story that's a historical story, but also comes out of the Bible, and it happened about 2,700 years ago, 721 BC. The conquering nation in the Middle East at that time was the Assyrian army, and the king was trying to just expand the Assyrian empire. Okay, if you've studied any kind of world history, you know about this. In 721, they were kind of rolling through the Middle East where the children of Israel were, and they captured the area of Samaria, not just the city that we know about the Samaritan woman, but the area of this. And they deported all of the people away. They just put them into captivity and took them away. And that was the main portion of what was then the northern kingdom. Do you remember how there were 12 tribes of Israel, and they were divided in the north and the south? And the northern part kind of got carried away, and it left the southern tribes pretty much exposed, because as the Assyrians were coming down from the north, they were wiping them out. And the king at that time was King Hezekiah. And so the city that they wanted to protect was the city of Jerusalem. You know, that was kind of the center for the children of Israel. It's where the temple was. It's where people came to every year to make sacrifice. This was kind of the center of their belief and of their rituals, and it just was a very, very special place for them, okay? The king knew the Assyrians were coming down, and so he said, I got to make preparations to protect the city. And so he put a call out for everybody that lived outside the city walls and says, hey, you are welcome to move inside the city walls. They fortified the city walls. They actually built a second ring of walls. They built towers so that they could monitor and see further away. They trained their soldiers. They also knew that the Assyrians had an attack plan that was very different. They were not the rabbit, they were the turtle. Okay, they weren't the tortoise, the hare, they were the tortoise. And what they would do is they would surround a city and lay siege to it and just sit. And they would starve them out. Or they would let, the water supply get down, or they would let them just lose their ever-loving minds, and turn on each other. They would build these ramparts or these ramps up with dirt, so while the city is being starved out, the people are seeing that the army is building these ramps, and so eventually they're going to walk up and step on to the top of the wall, and in their weakened condition could very easily be captured. In fact, Assyria, as they were moving through this area, had conquered 46 different cities. And so they come to the city of Jerusalem in 721 BC, and King Hezekiah calls all the people of this city together. And he stands up in 2 Chronicles chapter 32, verse 8. He says this, the Assyrians have a great army, but they're only men. We have the Lord our God to help us fight our battles. And the people trusted the words of King Hezekiah. Well, on the outside of the wall is a different story, because Sennacherib was the general that was tasked, the Assyrian general that was tasked with destroying all of Jerusalem to expand the kingdom. So on the inside, you have King Hezekiah saying, hey, we've got God. They've just got swords. On the outside, you have Sennacherib saying, we're going to wipe these people out. The other thing is that the city of Jerusalem was a pretty good-sized city, but there were several thousand people inside of there. Sennacherib's army that he had surrounding the city was 186,000 soldiers. So you get the picture. You're inside the city of Jerusalem, and you're looking over the wall, right? And all you can see, you're surrounded by just a mass of soldiers and tents and horses and catapults and trebuchets or whatever they use, and ramps that are being built. And you're freaking out, One thing that Hezekiah did that was smart, though, was that he built an underground aqueduct that was 600 yards long that went up to the springs of Gihon, which allowed them to get fresh water. And Sennacherib did not know about that. So there was this tension because Jerusalem was holding out longer than any other city. Most of them, when the army started, after they had conquered a few cities, whenever this 186,000 soldiers would start marching in, they would just wave the white flag and go, "We surrender. Take us to captivity. It's better than death or starvation," right? But Jerusalem didn't. And there's this tension because Jerusalem was holding out longer than that because he didn't know about the aqueduct, the underground aqueduct that he had that was bringing fresh water in. Sennacherib got really upset. And as history tells us, in fact, Sennacherib wrote down a story of the battle and put it in a kind of it's called a prism. It's not a prism. It's a clay pot, and it is the original is over in the Middle East, but they have a copy of it in Chicago at the History Museum. And I haven't been there, but you can supposedly look at it and see it. And so he's super frustrated, and so he starts talking about how they're just going to wipe them out. He speeds up the building of the ramp. He makes sure that there's no food getting into Jerusalem. He is ready to take these guys out. He's getting mad. And King Hezekiah from inside Jerusalem says, "We got to pray harder than we've ever prayed before." And he does something. He puts on sackcloth, okay? Which if you read the Old Testament, that is something you put on when you are in mourning or you are really seeking God, all right? You put on sackcloth, and so he prays to God, and the prophet that God was talking through at that time was Isaiah, was inside the city with them, and God spoke to Isaiah, and Isaiah comes to Hezekiah and says, "God has heard your prayer." Wow. I got to tell you, I would love that. Wouldn't you love that if you pray and somebody goes, "Hey, Dwayne, God heard your prayer." Now, you don't know how he's going to answer, but at least you're like, okay, so you're saying there's a chance, right? Right. And he says, "I will defend this city and save it." And in 2 Kings chapter 19, verse 35, this is what we read. "That night, the angel of the Lord," the only other time the angel of the Lord is used so far in the Bible was on the night the children of Israel left Egypt. Remember that? When he went through, and if they didn't have blood on the doorposts, the firstborn would die. Remember that? So this is a powerful moment. "The night the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 men in the Assyrian camp." Okay? 185,000 men. So you get the picture. About 1,000 guys get up the next morning and are like, "Hey, dude, you're sleeping. Hey. Oh, my gosh." And I don't know if you guys are into poetry, but there's a guy by the name of Lord Byron that wrote a poem called "The Destruction of Sennacherib," where he took this historical and biblical story and brought it together. I'm going to read some poetry for us this morning, okay? Why not? We're getting ready for the ladies, right? No, I'm just kidding. But listen to the story the way he put it when the Assyrians attack and what God did. "The Syrians came down like a wolf on the fold, and their cohorts were gleaming in purple and gold. The sheen of their spears was like stars on the sea when the blue wave rolls nightly on deep Galilee. Like the leaves of the forest when the summer is green, the host of their banners at sunset were seen. Like leaves of the forest when autumn is blown, the host in the morning lay withered and strown. For the angel of death spread its wings on the blast and breathed in the face of the foe as he passed. And the eyes of the sleepers waxed deadly and chill, and their hearts at once heaved, forever grew still. And there lay the steed with his nostrils all wide, but through it there rolled not a breath of his pride. And the foam of his gasping lay white on the turf, as cold as the spray of the rock-beating surf. And there lay the rider, distorted and pale, with dew on his brow and rust on his mail. And the tents were all silent, the banners alone. Their swords were unlifted, their trumpets unblown. And the widows in Asher, they wailed, are loud in their wail. And the idols are broken in their temple of Baal. And the might of the Gentile, unsmote by the sword, has melted like snow in the glance of the Lord. I mean, I love stories like that where the underdog, there's no way, and something changes, and they're triumphant. David defeating Goliath. Oh, we love that. You come at me with the sword, but I come at you with the Lord. Woo, wow. I mean, Don't we love those moments? We love those moments when people live by great faith. And we love that. But my life isn't like that. I have never been holed up in my home with 186,000 people surrounding it wanting to kill me. Right? It's never happened. I've never had a 9-foot Philistine walk down my driveway and go, Kast, you're mine. You know? I've never, ever had that. And so sometimes it's easy for me to go, wow, in the Bible and in history, they had great faith. But I don't really need that kind of faith. Anybody ever feel like that? You almost long for a day when you can literally, physically battle the odds? But yet, I believe every single day we do face not just a battle, but several battles. You know? I believe this morning, at least for me, Satan was saying, you don't need to go in there and teach. In fact, I told Blair, if somebody else was teaching today, I probably would have just not been here because I'm tired, right? But I also believe that we face attacks every day. As men, part of our job is to provide for our families. The other thing is to protect our families. And we are under siege every single day. So since we're probably not going to be King Hezekiah, who is inside of a city and trying to save his people and wakes up one morning and 185,000 people have died, how can we live by faith as men? And that's the question that I just want to ask us. And so what we want to do is we want to talk about faith that pleases God. How do we live by faith that pleases God? And the story that we're going to is the story of Joshua. We're finishing up our series in Joshua. We're going to be in Joshua chapter 6. And we're going to take a look at some of these verses here. Joshua chapter 6, verse 2 says this, Then the Lord said to Joshua, See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands along with the king and its fighting men. You know the scenario. Children of Israel escaped Egypt after 400 years of captivity. They wandered in the promised land for 40 years. One day for every day the spies were in the promised land. When 10 were bad and 2 were good, right? And the 10 said, oh, we can't do it, they're so big. And the 2 said, oh, they are so big, we can't do it without God. So God's going to have to do it. They wandered for 40 years, and then when they went to cross the Jordan, the Ark of the Covenant and the priests went through, and the water miraculously stood up like it had 40 years earlier at the Red Sea, and they entered in. And now they are standing there getting ready to take over the land that God has promised them, the promised land, the land of milk and honey, Jericho. Jericho is tightly shut up. It's a fortified city. It had 2 rings of walls. It was a preeminent city, and it was well defended. And so they're standing there, and it's before they do anything, and Joshua is awaiting the battle plan, and God says to him, I have already given it to you, past tense. I have delivered. And it reminded me of a verse in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8. And it says, don't forget this one thing, dear friends. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day. And it caused me to wonder about times in my life when I put God on my schedule and my timetable and my calendar. You ever question God's timing on something? I have. I remember when I was in college, I was dating a young girl named Jill Baker, and I was in love with Jill Baker. I really did. And one day, much to my surprise, she flat out dumped me. I know what you're saying. Her loss, I know. But but it hurt. It really did. I was devastated. And it was painful. And I can remember talking to God going, God, I thought this was, I was studying for the ministry. She was, studying she loved the church, was studying to do some ministry stuff. And it was really hard. But a year later, I started dating another girl whose name was Jill Graham. And we have been married 31 years. And but that year in between the 2 Jills, I like to keep my life simple, by the way. Okay, so Jesus and Jill, that's all I got to remember. They both start with J, That year in between, I have to be honest with you, there was a lot of questions. There was a lot of, hey, God, what the heck? Hey, God, what are you thinking? Hey, God, why? Hey, God, this isn't fair. Hey, God, do you see? Hey, God, do you know? Hey, God, what are you doing? Hey, God, give me a sign. And I think all of us have had that. And, the question I would ask, and you guys are going to get a chance to discuss in a little bit, is when was the time in your life that you had to trust in God's timing? Because faith that pleases God is a faith that sees as God sees. God says, I have given you this city. And I bet Joshua went, well, I don't know what you're smoking, but there's still a city there, and my name is not on the deed, right? He wouldn't say that to God. But faith that pleases God sees as God sees. The next one is that faith that pleases God follows God's plan. Joshua 6:3 says, march around the city once and with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. That is not a battle plan, all right? Marching is a part of battle, but you're marching towards something, not around something. And I imagine Joshua had to go, God, I know you're God and everything, but this is the worst battle plan ever. We're out here just, marching around the city. It's the weirdest battle plan ever. But I think as hard as it was for Joshua, can you imagine the children of Israel, what they faced? All right, guys, we're in the promised land. We're going to take over the city. Okay, what do you want us to do? I got my sword. I'm ready to go. We're going to march. Okay, good. We'll get out there. We'll clear a path. Now, actually, we're going to put the ministers out front. Oh, okay, because they're the ones we can sacrifice. Great. Let them go first. And then we're going to put the Ark of the Covenant. Oh, okay, all right. And then the people, and then you guys are in the back. Hey, Joshua, I don't know if you know how you attack, but you usually want the tip of the spear, not the minister, right? You want to go that way. We're going to do it. And we're going to march around the city, and I want you to do it silently. Are you kidding me? We can't talk all day? Yep. And they march around. And they do this for 6 days, all right? But then I also think, what do you think would have happened to the people inside Jericho? Approximately, the estimates are there's 2 million people in the children of Israel that had crossed over. And they had already heard what God had done with that. And then they wake up in the morning and they're peeking over the wall, and you see 2 million people in silence, just marching around. I got to go. I think that would just freak me out. It'd be an eerie feeling. All you see is the dust rising from their feet, And you wonder what they would do. They had to be an eerie feeling, but also I think you would have, since it was quiet, you'd have to start hurling insults at them. What are you guys doing? Hey, what are you going to do when you get to the corner? Make a left turn? Oh, you guys are NASCAR fans. I get it. All right, left turn. Great. Hey, y'all trying to get your steps in? Oh, I love that, man. You get your steps in today. That's good. And for 6 days, this happened. It couldn't have been easy. I can imagine about day 3, I'd be up at the wall if I was inside Jericho. Hey, what are you guys doing tomorrow? Oh, I bet I know. I'd be just kind of wearing them out. And the question I had to ask myself is, when my plan doesn't line up with God's plan, what do I do? A lot of times in my life, you know what I do? I just say, I'm going to do my plan and just hope that God blesses what I want to do. But faith that pleases God follows God's plan. And then, as we read in chapter 6, verses 4 or 5, it says, have the 7 priests carrying the trumpet of the ram's horn in front of the ark and march around. And on the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priest blowing the trumps. When you hear the sound of the long blast on the trumpets and all the people have given a loud shout, the wall is going to collapse and the people will go up, every man straight in. So the question is faith that pleases God walks even when walking isn't working. All right, as hard as it was to walk around the city once for 6 days, what do you think that 7th day was like? Okay, we got to do this 7 times. I imagine the people of Jericho go, man, they're looking on the wall going, man, the children of Israel are up kind of early today. Wow, there must be bad weather coming. They're making their lap. But they make the first lap, and they don't stop. They're going, hey, something's up. Something's different today. They're on their second lap. Hey, they're on their 3rd lap. Still silence. And they walk around the city. About 10 years ago, I was on a mission trip in Havana, Cuba, and we were there with a group of folks from the church. I don't know if you know about Havana, Cuba, but before the embargo, they had kind of they really liked the United States and had a big competition. In fact, they built their Capitol building to be exactly like our Capitol building in Washington, D.C., with one exception. They made theirs 1 foot taller than ours because they wanted to show that Cuba was greater than the United States. And one of the things, this picture was taken about 10 years ago, but you can still see they have like the 57 Chevys, and they've got diesel motors in them, so it's hilarious. So, and they're painted with like house paint, so they look, but it's something. But our group was praying for the leadership of Cuba because we really wanted them to turn their hearts toward God. We had been there working with some humanitarian things and seeing just what God had been doing. And so we decided that we were going to walk around the Capitol and pray in the same way that the children of Israel walked around Jericho. And so we, on a day that was about 100 degrees, walked around and prayed 13 times around the Capitol. And if you ever want to draw attention in a communist country, just, stand on the front steps of the Capitol and pray, and then just walk around all day. It was God protected us. It was interesting. But one of the things that I couldn't help but notice about the difference between Cuba and America was that the life in Cuba they feel like is so great, and it's really not. They talk about universal health care, and one of the ladies that was there was pregnant, and she started having some problems and hemorrhaging some blood, and so she had to get on a bus that's pulled by a semi-truck called a camel and take a 2-hour trip into the hospital, and she had to wait 24 hours to see a doctor and then was released. And it didn't cost her anything, but if there had been a critical issue, she would have died and lost the baby, And so Cuba, the leadership of Cuba has this pride that how great they are, when the reality is their people are suffering horribly. In fact, right across the street from this is a place that is called Paseo del Prado, and it literally is an avenue that's laid in mosaic tile, and it means the walk of the proud. And anytime that the leadership or one of the Castros would do something, they would walk down this, and this was their walk of the proud, where they would walk, or they would show their military, their military might. And I remember walking around the Capitol just sweating and just being like, to be honest with you, I'm like, I just want to get this done. Like, I'm hot, I'm thirsty, I don't want to get killed, I'd like to get back to see my wife, And right across the street is the Walk of the Proud. And just seeing the juxtaposition of how you have this edifice of a capital that's supposed to be this great thing in this great country, but then you see the people and how they live, and how they're treated. It just didn't go together. And I can remember walking around and praying and just saying, God, would you do something? But kind of in my heart, expecting him not to. Have you ever been in a situation like that where you've been walking through life and you're trusting God, but you don't feel like it's working when walking isn't working? And I have, and that's just one example. When walking doesn't seem to work, what do we do? The end of the story, Joshua chapter 6, verse 16, is kind of the conclusion of this great story. It says, the seventh time around, as the priests sounded the long blast on their horns, Joshua commanded the people, shout. Okay, you haven't been able to talk for a week, all right, at all? And all of a sudden, you hear the trumpet, and he says, shout. Man, I would be like, whoa! I would unleash everything I could. Can you imagine doing it? And the Lord, shout, for the Lord has given you the town. And when the people heard the sound of the ram's horn, they shouted as loud as they could. Suddenly, the walls of Jericho collapsed, and the Israelites charged straight into the town and captured it. They completely destroyed everything in it with their swordsmen and women, with their swords. Men and women, young and old, cattle, sheep, goats, and donkey. They wiped everything out. And that's the moment when they knew that the faith that they had in God was working. What they couldn't see, they now could see. With the plan that was different from what they thought had worked to perfection. All of their walking that didn't seem like it was working, now it worked. Okay? So here's what I want us to do. Let's not leave this in a story of Sennacherib. Let's not leave this in a story of Joshua. Let's bring it home. And at our tables, I want us to talk through these 3 questions, okay? Share a time in your life when you had to trust God's timing. When God's plan doesn't line up with your plan, what do you usually do? Like, what's your default? Like, don't say, I just love Jesus and it's all good, okay? Because this is, let's be honest, okay? Based on our discussion today, how would you describe the faith that you live by each day? And I gave some kind of descending order. Pleasing to God, just okay to God, inconsistent, sporadic, non-existent, ... Okay? So if one of the words up there is not, you had to pick out a word that would describe kind of your faith, all right? And then let's do that. So jump in at your tables. Let's have that discussion, and thank you for being here.